I am a Klansman, aka Bigfoot's daughter. Yes, I completely understand exactly how unbelievable that sounds. The fact remains that my mother was sexually assaulted by a real-life Bigfoot just outside of her and my stepfather's camp on Prince of Wales Island. For whatever reason you clicked on that thumbnail or the title of this video to watch it, I promise you this, you're not going to want to leave. You're going to want to stay and hear this because this is probably going to be the most important information you've ever heard that has anything to do with Bigfoot, Sasquatch, cryptids of any sort. This is Bigfoot's actual daughter. So you're going to want to stick around and hear this. This message is really important and probably the last one we're ever going to hear from her. And I'll tell you why. I got a lot to unpack here and share with you, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, Steve, or should I say Mr. Strange, laugh out loud. This is Clair. I hope you are doing well. Unfortunately, I've had some time on my hands, so I've decided it is time to share my full story and some other important updates with you and your TAS friends and family. For those of you who don't know me, my pen name is Clair. I am a Klansman, aka Bigfoot's daughter. Yes, I completely understand exactly how unbelievable that sounds. Whether you're a lighthearted Bigfoot enthusiast or especially if you are what you might consider a level-headed realist. The fact remains that my mother was sexually assaulted by a real-life Bigfoot just outside of her and my stepfather's camp on Prince of Wales Island, while my stepfather was being forcibly led deeper into a forest. You guys, I want you to know that I've met these people in person. Claire's real. Okay, so this story, you got to hear this. Somehow my mother survived the assault, and 9.5 months later I was born. Being what most would call a miracle baby, but was I? However, the next several years I suffered through unimaginable mental and physical pain, some of which my mother explained we purposely left out more than you could ever imagine. Yet despite all that I had to endure as a child, I believe the pain that my mother endured watching me go through it was much greater. Somehow she and my stepfather together molded what most people would consider a freak of nature into a happy, successful wife, mother, and independent individual. And despite all the government and secret agencies looking to get their hands on me, they were able to raise me right in plain sight. This is my story. My mother's pen name is Wendy. She was the first to share this story on a video called I Gave Birth to Bigfoot's Daughter here on this channel. While her journey began a long time ago, our adventure intensified over the past couple of years. As you may already know, my mother and my stepfather were part of a rather large but highly secretive Bigfoot research advocate organization. With this past couple of years being the most intense and educational to date, we have met some very interesting people and unfortunately have also lost some along the way. Which leads me to the first and most important update I have to share with you. It's also the most difficult. My mother, the woman you all know as Wendy, is no longer with us. It's in my deepest regret to inform you all that as of last Wednesday, my mother lost a very long battle that she has been keeping secret for over 20 years. Only a small handful of us knew about her condition. It's difficult. My mother suffered from a rare blood disorder that she discovered in 2014. A major part of her and my stepfather's research was in hopes of finding a cure. Recently, while on a trip overseas, she got very sick with what we thought was a flu bug of sort. She was on the mend and doing very well when something changed and she suddenly took a rapid turn for the worse. Despite some incredible medical treatments, she was unable to bounce back like we had hoped she would. Within 48 hours, she slipped into a coma. 24 hours after that, she was gone. I want you all to know that she passed away peacefully in her sleep with her family by her side. And as difficult as it is, we are all thankful that we were able to say our goodbyes before she left us. We don't know for sure if it was the blood disorder that was the culprit or if it was just a combination of random events that weakened her enough that she couldn't recuperate. Either way, she is at peace now, and I'm sure in some form, some way, she will continue her journey while looking over all of us. As a tribute to her, I'd like to start my story in her words. That's how I began, after all. I have the original message that she shared with you on December of 2023. I have added in some of my points of view along the way, then continue with my side of the story as a daughter of a Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or as I prefer to call us, a Klansman. Per my mother's request, I am going to also share with you the answers to some of the biggest questions ever asked about my forest people, finishing with an update as to where the team will go from here without our patriarch. So here it goes. Hi, Steve. My pen name is Wendy. I am 58 years young and I still live in Alaska. After you hear my story, you might ask yourself why. But the fact is, even though it can be one of the most dangerous places on earth to live, it is still one of the most beautiful places on earth. Now, this is a side note from Clair, where she adds them in. My mother chose the name Wendy in memory of her childhood best friend, and my pen name Clair after her childhood cat. Laugh out loud. As she said, most of you probably already know Alaska can be very dangerous, but my mother was first Alaskan through and through. Her heart and soul belonged to Alaska, and Alaska belonged to her. She continued, I'm forewarning you now, it is not a bird-watching Harlequin romance story, nor am I, or ever have I been, what you might consider a Harlequin model material. I am what you might call a rugged, full-figured woman. But don't get me wrong, I am very proud of who I am and how I look. I just don't want to give the wrong impression going into the story. There are 3 people and 1 Bigfoot on Earth to know about what I'm about to tell you. That is why I must remain anonymous. I took every precaution possible in sending this message to you. I know I am not alone. Whomever hears this story, if you, Steve, choose to share this on your channel, I want them to know you are not alone either. This is another Clair note. This was mostly true. My mother was a full-figured, amazing woman and was never ashamed of how she looked, even though she always looked great to me and was as tough as any woman I've ever met anyway. She said that only 3 people and 1 Bigfoot knew about what happened to her on Prince of Wales Island. That wasn't entirely true, but at the time she was protecting the rest of the team involved. The fact is that while her and my stepfather did step away from Bigfoot investigating, they quietly assembled a team of experts that included not just wilderness and scientific, but also legal experts. Their goal wasn't just to find out why what happened to her happened, but if it was happening to others as well. As they embarked on this investigation and learned more and more about the Klansmen, they realized that the Klansmen also needed protection from society. Their goal was first, find out everything they could to make sure I had all the answers I would need as I grew up, for lack of a better word, as a Bigfoot hybrid child. Second, make sure that other people had a safe place to turn in the event that this happened to them, and at the same time, try to prevent it from happening again to anyone else, all at the same time, or all the while, looking for ways to protect these endangered species. Finally, they were also looking for any possible cures and knowledge they might be able to offer all of us. She continued, there are support groups out there for people that have had encounters that changed their lives forever. This is why I am sharing this story with you. Here's a side note from Clair. Okay, so there are several very secretive support groups out there for people that have had these types of encounters. My mother and stepfather were one of them, but on a smaller scale because of their work. However, through the years, they helped countless people. People ask all the time, how do I find these groups? Well, here's the tricky part. You probably won't. They will find you via social media, police reports, and Bigfoot research networks all over the world. My husband and I used to be Bigfoot investigators, long before it was cool and all over the TV and internet. While he was doing his Bigfoot thing, I was more of a camping and hiking enthusiast. To be honest, even though he found a lot of what you would call compelling evidence, I really didn't buy into it all as much as he did. We traveled all over the country and met with a lot of really cool and fun people along the way. Some of them were a bit fruity and kind of scary, but mostly fun-loving folks. I really enjoyed hiking, fishing, and living off the land. We found ourselves in some really remote areas at times, but sometimes a little too remote even for me. even though I was always armed and ready for almost anything. During those years, we had a couple of grizzly bear encounters in Montana, and a moose chased us almost a mile in Anchorage, Alaska. That wasn't fun at all, but we did laugh about it for days afterwards. One time in the state of Washington, I was out for a hike alone when I had a massive cougar stalking me all the way back to camp. We carried walkie-talkies, and so I radioed into my husband, and he was waiting with his rifle when I got back and chased it off with a couple of warning shots. I guess you have to expect that sort of thing to happen when you're out there in the woods as far as we were as often as we did. However, what happened next, no one should ever have to expect. It was the summer of 1990. By now we had traveled camp and investigated most of the country. But there was one place not far from us that we still hadn't been, and for good reason. It's called Prince of Wales Island, aka Bigfoot Island. If you watch that show on TV called Expedition Bigfoot, they filmed it there, and it was every bit as dangerous as they say. I'm warning you now, don't go there. This is a place where people go and never come back. Everyone knows this place is mostly off limits and dangerous. Even though I said I didn't buy into all the Bigfoot myths, this place still scared the hell out of me for some reason. But it was nearby us, and we needed to escape for a little while. The thing is, we had been trying to have a child for several years. Every pregnancy ended early or not at all. So these adventures kept us going, and despite all my senses telling me to sit this one out, I packed my things and off we went. We reached our destination, made camp in early afternoon. My husband was anxious to get started, so he set out to scout the area, and I stayed behind to finish setting up camp and prepare for the weekend. He got back as it was getting dark. We ate dinner and had a couple of drinks while planning our next couple of days' events, then settled in for the night. As usual, sometime during the night, we started hearing noises from the woods, some far off, but some were just outside of our camp. A couple of times we heard what sounded like something big walking around outside the campsite. My husband checked it out but didn't see anything. Believe it or not, this is fairly common in the woods at night, when your senses are all heightened and every noise potentially sounds like something that actually isn't. Most of the next day we set out together and did some serious hiking. Like I said, we have seen a lot of forests in our travels, but this forest, as beautiful as it is one of the creepiest I have ever been in. This area was cluttered with moss-covered dead trees. It was dark, wet, and swampy, but we found a lot more Bigfoot evidence than anywhere else we've ever been before. Like large footprints in the mud that actually looked like huge, cracked, callous human feet. Broken trees stacked in abnormal ways. Some were even uprooted and shoved back into the ground upside down. Strangely, though, not a lot of wildlife. It was actually ghostly quiet. Yet the whole time we felt like we were being watched. It was that same feeling we had when that cougar was stalking me in Washington. Only I seen him, and here I couldn't see whatever it was. We made our way back to camp that evening, had dinner, and had a couple of drinks. Clair note. You might have noticed that my mother mentioned having a couple of drinks a couple of times in this story, laugh out loud. I didn't even know they drank until I read the story, before she said it in. She said they used to carry the ingredients for a mixed drink with them, but quit drinking altogether after she found out she was pregnant. My stepfather still drank now and then. I can't imagine why. Continuing. This time we had a lot to talk about because of all the stuff that we found, but I noticed something different about my husband. He didn't seem to have that same fire in his eyes. It was almost like the closer he came to finding what we were looking for, the more he really didn't want to find it. And oddly enough, that night was quiet and uneventful. The next day he set out on his own. This was a normal routine. He'd go do his thing, and I'd hang back at the camp and do some cleaning, or maybe take a hike or do some fishing. Sometimes I'd read my book. This time I decided to go fishing in a spot not more than 150 or 200 yards from the camp through a small wooded trail. It was much nicer morning. The birds were singing, and I wanted to try and get some sun and on the bank of the river. It only took a couple of hours to catch a string of fish, So I put my pole away and cleaned them on a big rock by the edge of the water. I was just about done when I got that feeling again. I literally felt the hair on my neck stand up. I got scared and started looking all around but didn't see anything. I quickly finished up and started walking back towards camp. As I moved further away from the noisy water, I noticed the sound of the birds was gone. In fact, it was completely quiet and there was this foul odor in the air. I was looking all around to see if there was a dead animal carcass nearby that I hadn't noticed when I walked through the first time, but didn't see anything. Then I heard branches snapping in the woods not more than 5 to 15 yards away. I got really scared. I was half expecting a bear to come flying out of the forest after me, so I started fumbling around trying to get to my pistol. I ended up dropping my fish and fishing gear to the ground in front of me, then tripped over them and fell forward onto a pile of slippery timbers that crossed the path. As I was trying to get back up, I got extremely lightheaded. I thought it was caused by the combination of nerves and pain from the fall. I tried to fight through it, but ended up passing out. When I came to, I was back near the river. I was confused and not quite sure where I was yet. As my vision came back, I could see the big rock where I had cleaned the fish just downstream from me. I tried to stand up, but it was really difficult at first. I was in a lot of pain. I felt like I had been punched in the gut over and over again, and my clothes were torn almost completely off me. I think at this point you can probably put the rest together. Clair note. This is another part of the story my mother left out, some details. Her and my stepfather were pretty sure by this point that the island was definitely occupied by actual Bigfoot. She knew the signs of Bigfoot being present, just never experienced it to this level, so she had a very good idea at the time, not whom, but what sexually assaulted her. She just didn't like saying it. She was also in shock and repressing a lot of what happened. She did follow up with hypnosis and other treatments to help her deal with what happened, but in the end, it was her own inner strength that got her through. And there is still that question of, was this what caused the blood disorder in the first place? We may never know. Let's continue. I crawled down to the river and splashed water on my face, hoping and praying it was just a bad dream and I would soon wake up. That maybe I fell and hit my head and was just dazed and confused. I looked myself over to see if I had any serious injuries. My clothes had been torn mostly from my body, including my jeans. I had some nasty scratches and was bleeding down below. I guess I knew what happened, but I refused to believe it was real at the time. Despite my weak, trembling legs, I made my way back to the big rock where I had cleaned the fish. When I got there, I noticed that the fish guts and heads were all gone, but that could have been birds or any number of wild animals that collected them. I continued my way back to camp. I must have lost track of time as it was already getting close to evening. Oddly, I found my fish, fishing gear, and gun in the same spot that I'd passed out. I also noticed that I could hear the birds again and that smell of rotted flesh was gone. When I got there, my husband wasn't back yet. I was glad because I really didn't want him to know what had happened anyway, and I wasn't ready to deal with it and wasn't sure how he would deal with it either. So I removed my bloody, torn clothes and hid them in a garbage bag deep in my backpack. Then downed half a flask of my husband's whiskey, followed by a lot of water. I really had no idea what to make of it all. I was terrified, disgusted, and confused about what happened. It felt like my mind wasn't my own, and I honestly wasn't sure if it really was. I had to try and shake it off. I guess I was thankful to be alive and not bear scat, because had it been a bear, I would have been dead. I tried to lay down, but when I did, my head would swim. So I got up and started working around the camp, gathering wood and getting a fire going for dinner. It was getting really close to dark when I realized my husband wasn't back. I started to realize that something might have happened to him as well. So I got our radio out and tried to reach him, but he didn't respond. I tried for over 2 hours. I started thinking, my God, how would I stay in this camp all night without him? And what happened to him? And why isn't he returning? Then all of a sudden I heard something smashing through the woods. I grabbed my pistol and was ready to shoot the first thing that came out at me. Thank God I didn't. To my relief, it was my husband, and he was just as happy to see me as I was him. I asked if he was okay because he was out of breath and stumbling all around like he'd been drinking. He was obviously exhausted and seemed very disoriented. But then he caught a breath and said, "Boy, am I glad to see you." He nervously laughed and gave me a big hug. So I asked him, "What happened? Where have you been?" He said, "I don't know what happened out there. I got lost. I kept hearing noises that sounded like whistles and laughter, like kids playing all around me. I tried to find out where they were coming from, but they just led me out further away from the camp. I started to realize that I might be in danger, so I tried to turn back. But my compass wasn't working either. So I tried my radio, but my walkie-talkie died too. I had that same feeling we had yesterday, like something was following me the whole time. While I was out there, I kept smelling this wicked, awful smell of rotting meat all around me. At one point, it got so bad I started running, and I swear I heard something chasing me. I wasn't sure at the time if I'd even make it back." Here's a Clair note. He told my mother and me years later that he'd never been so scared in his life. And let me tell you this, he's not the kind of guy that scares easy. Continuing. Then he said, "I finally got a grip long enough to look for the sun setting. That's how I figured out the direction to go this way." He said, "Everything was dead quiet out there the whole time I was lost, except for those footsteps branch breaking all around me, right up until I found my way back here anyway. I probably wouldn't have found you if you hadn't lit that fire. A couple of times I thought I'd seen smoke up through the trees and glowing ambers, so I followed it here." After he settled down a bit, he turned to me and asked, "How about you? Are you okay?" You look pretty frazzled yourself." I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I was just really scared that I'd lost you." And here's a Clair note. She didn't mention in this story that he also noticed that she was limping around and had a couple of noticeable scratches. She told him that she had slipped on a wet log and fell, that she got hurt, but she was okay. Also, she fully believed that what happened to him was not a coincidence at all. She continued, "That night we had dinner and several drinks before we turned in. He fell fast asleep while I stared at the tent walls in horror, grasping my pistol all night waiting for the worst to come. But instead, it was just a normal sounding night. The next morning, I noticed that my husband wasted no time packing up to leave this place. I did my best to hide my pain and fear from him as I helped gather our stuff just as anxiously. A few days had passed and I could tell something was wrong with me. So I went in to see my doctor. Obviously, I didn't tell him what had happened. I just said that my husband and I were camping and maybe fooled around a little bit in the woods, if you get my drift. After some tests, he said I just had an infection and it was good that I came in when I did. The next time we feel frisky in the woods, to get a blanket or something. He prescribed me some antibiotics, and I thought that would be the end of it. A few weeks later, I started feeling sick again, only this time it was different. I thought maybe the infection had come back, but was a lot worse than the first time. So I went back to see my doctor. He ran some tests and shortly after came back into the room with a smile on his face. I asked him what he was smiling about, and he said, "Well, it looks like you brought back something extra from your little camping trip there, kiddo." My heart sunk straight to my gut and my jaw hit the floor. I asked him what exactly he was talking about, and he said with a grin, "You don't have an infection, you're pregnant." My hand straight covered my mouth, and I said, "Don't fook." And that was what she said, fook. "Don't fook with me." He replied, "Take it easy, it's still early. We can run some more tests just to be certain. But in my opinion, you are pregnant." Then gave me a few minutes to let it set in. He chuckled as he left the room, but he had no idea what he had just laid on me. At that time, I'd rather he'd just said I had an infection. Then that feeling of disbelief I'd felt that day came flooding back. I didn't know what to do and had no one to confide in. I was and still am very strongly against abortion, though at the time, I have to admit, it was the first thing that crossed my mind. But for some reason, I just couldn't do it. I mean, at the end of the day, I really still wasn't sure what had happened to me out there, and not 100% anyway. But I had to tell my husband something. Just didn't know what to say exactly. So I just prayed it would work itself out, and a few weeks later, I told him that we finally did it. I think we were going to have a baby. He was so happy, and for the first time since that trip, It felt like the clouds had been lifted, that somehow this was more of a miracle than a nightmare. So every day I prayed that this was his baby. I prayed so hard that after a while, even I started to believe it. At least that's what I tried to convince myself on the inside. On the outside, I knew exactly what it was. After 9.5 of the most confusing and painful months of my life, the time had come. I was in labor, seemingly forever. Finally, the moment of truth was upon us. I watched my doctor and the nurses' faces to see if they made any funny, disgusted looks. I half expected the nurses to scream and run out of the room, but they didn't. Instead, he smiled and held up my baby and said, "Congratulations, it's a girl." Then he turned her around for us to see. I burst out crying. My husband hugged me tight and said, "It's okay, honey, you did it. She's beautiful." And she was. But they couldn't see what I seen. I knew at first sight what I was looking at. As human as she looked to the doctor and nurses and my husband, she wasn't his baby, at least not genetically, nor was she a normal human baby. Clair note. I want to stop for a moment here to say I am so proud of my mother. Despite all that she had gone through and would go through, she never for a moment ever gave me a cross look or threw it in my face that I wasn't completely normal human baby. She gave me more love and respect and understanding than anyone could have ever given me. To continue, aside from a lot of hair, you couldn't tell that she was anything more than a hairy baby girl. The doctor made a comment about this and said that it is fairly normal and will probably just go away on its own. But it didn't. Over the next couple of years, it got much worse. Her pediatrician called it hypertrichosis and wanted to do some testing. But I said no because I was afraid of what they might actually find out. My husband was pretty upset with me about turning down the testing and then eventually started to become suspicious. So I finally had no choice but to tell him the truth. Imagine that conversation for a moment. And the look on his face when I said, honey, our daughter is a Sasquatch. Well, when I first told him, he got really mad and didn't believe me at all. Then he questioned my sanity, not that I could blame him. Then he asked me how long I'd been cheating on him, with who, and demanded a DNA test. I assured him that I've never cheated on him and argued the question, what would happen to her if it got out to the public that she wasn't completely human? Finally, in a last-ditch effort, I brought out the bag of old blood-stained clothes that I was wearing when it happened and laid them out on the floor in front of him. It was the first time I'd seen them since that day. I watched him as he stared in disbelief for a few minutes as all the pieces came together for him. Then he collapsed to his knees and clenched the clothes in his fists. I could see the fury coursing through his veins 1 minute, then sadness hit him as he looked up at me. This was the first time I'd ever seen him cry. Then he started shaking, and the grief turned to vengeance. All at once, he sprung to his feet and headed straight for the gun cabinet. I knew exactly what he was thinking and knew if he went out there hunting for this creature, I'd never see him again. So I pulled, pushed, screamed, and begged him not to go. I explained, I think all this happened for a reason and that we are lucky to even be alive. I pointed to our daughter's bedroom and said, that's the only thing that got me through all this, that no matter what or how, she is a gift. She is our daughter to love and protect. I had told him that everything we've ever been searching for all these years is sleeping in that room right now. Clair note. My mother said it took everything she had to keep him there, and even for the next few weeks wasn't sure if he would go anyway. She also said it was a few days before they could even talk. It was just a lot for him to take in all at once. Somehow he put it behind him, and like I said about my mother, I am just as proud of him. I never for a moment felt like I wasn't truly his blood daughter. He dedicated his life to taking care of us and never showed 1 ounce of regret for doing it. Mom continued to say, now we needed to make a plan to hide her in plain sight so she wouldn't become a lab animal. We did some research and found a specialist in electrolysis that we could trust, then started the long battle of removing enough hair that she could someday attend school and fit in. but it was a long, painful process, and we ended up homeschooling her until junior high anyway. Also, we all have canine teeth, but hers are quite a bit more pronounced. We had to have them filed just a little every year because they kept growing back. By the time she was 12, she was taller than both of us at 6 foot. Of course, she ended up playing high school basketball and got through college on a partial scholarship. Then she went on to become a social worker. She's 32 years old, 6'4". She got married and has 2 beautiful kids, and they're already quite tall. When she was 27, she asked us to tell her the truth, that she knew there was something different about her and she needed to understand exactly what that was. We thought it would crush her, but instead, after a few days of processing it, she thanked us for telling her and for being her parents. I was very worried she might want to meet her real father someday, but thank goodness she never asked or tried to go meet him on her own. She still gets electrolysis treatments and probably always will. Not that it matters, she is so beautiful inside and outside anyway. Oh, and as strong as hell. Not normal strong either, laugh out loud. You know exactly where that came from. It doesn't matter though, because she's our baby girl and I wouldn't change a thing about her. So remember to always count your blessings no matter where they come from, because you can find good in everything if you look hard enough. So that's my story, and believe it or not, I'm only one of many. Maybe after hearing this message, more like me will come forward. Thank you for giving us a place to communicate and share our story, Steve. I hope this helps anyone else out there that needs it. Yours truly, Wendy. Claire's story, to be continued. Okay, so there it is. That was the first part of Claire's story, and unfortunately, the end of Wendy's journey. I'm so sorry to tell you guys that. I'm sorry, and I was just as shocked to hear it myself. I knew that Wendy was sick when they were in Europe. I had no idea how bad, as far as I knew as well. She was on the mend. I thought that they were going to head out and continue their work, what they were doing, and get back to us with some information. I never expected this message to come, and it was really difficult because I got to be honest, Wendy is probably the one that really, aside from all of you, is the one that set my channel off. That story, when that came in, I mean, I think it's well over 200,000 views on that video. Such an important story that she shared with us, an important part of her life. And I was so honored. I am honored that they were willing to share that part of their lives with me and their journeys. I'm nobody. I mean, I'm just a little channel here. And as I said many times, I had no idea where this channel was going and what I was going to be doing. It just turned out that way. And some of these stories are so incredible, but rest in peace, Wendy. Thank you so very much for trusting me with the details in your lives. So with that said, I'll continue part 2 coming up next, and I'll post that in the upper corner here for you guys to go watch. I hope you do. I hope you enjoy it. Make sure you leave a comment, and tomorrow night we'll talk more about it on the live show. So let's move forward to the next part. It's a little bit shorter.